There were other kinds of traps. A tunnel rat might have hit a tripwire while crawling, and then the tunnel would have collapsed on him. There's a
Oh
story of a
no.
tunnel rat that popped his head out of one entrance, and that triggered a spear that went through his neck. At other
Oh
times, the Viet
my
Cong made traps
gosh,
like something you might
man.
have seen
Oh
in an Indiana
no.
Jones movie.
What's up, team? My name is Tom, and today we're gonna watch a documentary about why the tunnel rat profession in Vietnam War was so dangerous. For people who don't know, tunnel rats were the people who were had to crawl beneath the ground into the Vietnamese underground tunnels and search for the enemy. And that was a really dangerous job, and we will find out why. Let's go.
June 11th, 1969, Ba Ria City, Vung Tau Province, Vietnam. A newbie tunnel rat arrived at the base to a scene of utter destruction. Just days earlier, a platoon was hit by an M16 mine, aka the Jumping Jack. It got that name for the way it jumped in the air when stepped on. It killed 3 men and injured 24 others. Not long after the hidden enemy laid an anti-personnel mine, a personnel carrier
Oh
hit that.
no.
It was the
Man, listen, it's so scary, man. Because, like, imagine you are in the circumstances where everything can kill you. I would be on paranoia 24/7. I'm telling you, this is so
first time that
like
the
nerve
unseasoned
wracking.
tunnel rat saw a dead body. It was chaos, each and every day. He had to learn fast. The #1 tunnel rat, nicknamed Yogi, was hit twice by mines. Bits were hanging off him as he told the newbie what he had to do next. This was not a job for the faint of heart, but someone had to do it. That story is true. It happened to a combat engineer in the Australian Army. He took on one of the hardest and scariest roles in the war, that of a tunnel rat. We'll get back to his story, but first,
Man, I
let's
have
talk about the
goosebumps.
joke.
I don't know
Prior
why.
to the Americans going to war with the Viet Cong, the French fought the Viet Minh from 1946 to 1954. During that time, the Viet Minh learned a thing or two about fighting a superpower. To beat someone far more powerful than yourself, you had to resort to guerrilla tactics. One of those tactics was keeping below ground. And so
Yeah.
the Viet Minh got to work building
Especially for Vietnamese, that was a good strategy because USA was using a lot of bombs, and they were using I think it was Nepal or some Napal or something like that. That was the name of the liquid that they were spreading. That was burning everything on the ground. You know, even like burning through the skin, like terrible things,
a
man.
massive complex of tunnels.
So that's
When
why
the Americans
tunnels were
arrived in
the
1955,
thing.
the tunnels were already vast, but it was the Viet Cong that really made them a feat of engineering. During the Vietnam War, or the American War to the Vietnamese, the Viet Cong used those tunnels for all kinds of things. While the opening to the tunnels was small, they might lead to a complex system of tunnels that would lead to large underground spaces. It was within these spaces that
I would send the youngest troops to crawl under the ground because most of the youngest soldiers are very delirious. They think about the war in in romantic way, you know, because they have never met it, and this is one of the reasons why they go to war also. So this is what I would do if I would be a commander.
the Viet Cong would hide, eat, sleep, and machinate attacks on their enemy. The tunnel served as headquarters,
Man, these
hospitals,
tunnels are
barracks, and
legit.
storage
Look, it's like
facilities.
a
Since they had
house.
ventilation systems, it
Forget about the mortgage, you guys. Just build a tunnel under the ground and live there, and that's it.
was possible to stay down there for a prolonged period of time. So we're not so much talking about men burrowing like rabbits, but men living in a subterranean world.
Also, guys, please like, subscribe, click the bell for notifications, and comment below your thoughts about the Vietnamese War.
These worlds provided safety from the hostiles. Like snakes, the men would come out of them at night, lay traps for the enemy, and sneak back into the tunnel. And that's how so many American and Australian soldiers lost their lives, to mine-laying soldiers that were rarely seen above ground. It was actually an Australian combat engineering unit, the 3 Field Force, that were the first tunnel rats. The Americans later joined them, but we don't imagine guys were queuing up for the job. Just imagine it. They find the entrance but have no idea where the tunnel will lead or who they will encounter down there. That wasn't the only threat of humans to worry about, too. Vietnam is in the tropics, and the tropics are home to all kinds of dangerous creatures. Have you ever seen a Vietnamese giant centipede? Those fast-moving,
gosh.
prehistoric-looking creatures deliver one of the most painful insect bites known to man. And guess what? They too like to hide in tunnels.
And
They know
probably
where
it's
the
deadly
snakes,
also.
the highly venomous and deadly banded krait, the malignant pit viper, the king cobra, and a whole host
Oh
of other
my
badass snakes
gosh.
that can
The worst place that you wanna have your enemy hiding in.
spoil a person's day. The soldiers had to deal with ants' nests,
Oh
annoying
my
bats, rats
God.
carrying the bubonic plague, as well as spiders that weren't generally
Are you
a threat
kidding
to
me
life,
for real?
but could make life painful. So
This
you can
is
imagine that going into
unbelievable.
one of those tunnels was about as frightening as getting into Ted Bundy's Volkswagen Beetle, but they had to do it, lest more men get blown to bits by these damned jumping jack mines. If the men can infiltrate the tunnels, they might not only kill a few of the enemy, but they would usually come across a stash of mines, grenades, and guns. There was another problem concerning arms. The tunnels were small, and so that meant that the tunnel rats could
Yes, because Vietnamese are very small also. For big Americans, it's very problematic to get through.
take larger guns down them. They were usually only equipped with an M1911 pistol or an M1917 revolver. They'd also have a flashlight, a knife, and usually some explosives so they could blow up whatever they found down there. You can just picture it, a man crawling through the
It's
darkness
scary,
with his
man.
flashlight
And
in one
also,
hand.
Vietnamese were setting up booby traps into those tunnels, and those booby traps were just killing you. Like literally, you could drown, you could get smashed by like spikes. So, like,
His pistol in
man,
the other.
this
He
is terrible.
crawls and crawls, and then he sees the enemy. He shoots, and then all he can hear is ringing in his ears. He's blinded by the flash and deafened by the noise. Then the earth above his head starts to fall. He needs to get out fast. What he doesn't know is that the Viet Cong have something special for him: poisonous gas. And this
Oh
tunnel rat
no,
didn't choose the gas
man.
mask option
Oh
because the last
no.
time he wore one, he could barely see. If the gas
Ugh.
doesn't get him, the flood will. The Viet Cong designed this particular tunnel with a flooding
Like,
feature. If
you better not be claustrophobic, man, because this stuff is very claustrophobic.
it should ever be infiltrated. Other times, the tunnel might just collapse, which wasn't a design feature but a case of poor construction. You'd have to be crazy to do this job. You also had to be short. Imagine a hulk of a man with quite the belly trying to navigate around a tunnel. Soldiers that were picked for the job were usually not taller than 165 centimeters. It was the same years later when the US Marine Corps and British Royal Marines fought in the Afghanistan War. Yeah, tunnel rats weren't only a thing in Vietnam. But let's stay with Vietnam for now and go back to the Australian soldier. He was trained at the Australian Army's School of Military Engineering. He actually thought that this line of study would mean he'd be facing less combat and doing more engineering. He was wrong. He was being trained to become a tunnel rat.
Oh,
that meant
no.
learning about things such as mine detection, disarming booby traps, safely blowing stuff up, and learning how to get through tunnels. When he arrived in Vietnam, he walked into chaos. As we said, one of the first things he saw was the aftermath of a soldier stepping on a jumping jack mine. 3 bodies were outfitted with body bags, and after that, 24 men were
Put
wounded.
him in a
He said
body
those
bag.
M16 mines were everywhere, and it was part of his job to find them. What the Viet Cong did was store them in the tunnels and then lay them at night. So each day was a new day, and there was always a possibility of new mines lying around. That's why the tunnel rat had such an important job. Find where the mines were stored and blow up the tunnel, and then no more mines. When he started the job, he worked as a tunnel rat number 2. He worked in a pair with tunnel rat number 1, and when 6 months was up, he became number 1, and he was joined by a newbie. He hadn't been at number 2 for long when he heard that a number 1 tunnel rat named Yogi had stood on a mine. Yogi was
Oh,
alive,
no.
but as you can imagine, he wasn't looking too well. In fact, only 3 Australians that stood on mines made it back home with their legs and lives intact. Yogi was one of
Bro, man, war is so devastating. I'm telling you, imagine you're just like getting ripped, your leg is getting ripped off, or your arm is getting ripped off by a mine. Man, this is so sad. Oh my gosh.
them. He was lucky. The fatality rate in his unit was 33%. That's one reason why going into tunnels was not a prospect most soldiers liked. The Americans wanted to destroy the tunnels not from the inside but from the outside. If you dropped enough bombs on suspected tunnels, then they would cave in and anyone inside would suffocate. If you sprayed poisonous gases into them, the Viet Cong would die. You could also try and flood the area where the tunnels were, and by doing that, drown the enemy.
That's what I thought, by the way, also why they didn't use any kind of gases. But then I remember that advanced Viet Cong tunnels had a ventilation system in
That
case
these
of
efforts didn't always
this
result in success. The reason
occasion.
for that was the fact that the Viet Cong made more impressive tunnels. They made
Yeah.
them blast-proof, flood-proof, and provided extra ventilation so the gases weren't effective.
I
They also
told you
made them in a
guys, I
zigzag
told you
shape to
guys.
mitigate the effect of an explosion. This is why the tunnel rat was indispensable. Those guys were the only thing that really worked. Believe it or not, most American soldiers were not chosen to do this job, but actually volunteered. Most soldiers thought you'd have to be out of your mind to do the work. The centipedes and the snakes were one thing, but suffocation in a collapsed tunnel was something from a nightmare. So why
Basically,
did
you
they
get
volunteer?
buried
One soldier
alive.
back then said it was sometimes a macho thing. Soldiers did it to show others just how tough they were. He said that many tunnel rats had had problematic lives back home in the US, so they wanted to show that they could be useful. And useful they were, as well as brave. One tunnel rat named C.W. Bowman said that his fellow soldiers thought he was a maniac doing the job. He said they took bets each time he went into a tunnel, and some men betted that he would die. Some men almost did, and this would become a weakness for the US military. We'll get around to that soon. Let's first take you through a mission. You shoot first and ask questions later. That was
For
the mantra
sure.
of the tunnel rat. Anything they came across, they shot at. They would usually fire only 3 bullets and then reload. The reason for this was the enemy wouldn't know how many bullets they had in the chamber. Let's say the mission was successful, and that the tunnel rat took out the enemy and discovered what was hidden down there. What would they find? On one mission, the tunnel was around 120 feet. At the end of the tunnel, the rat found places where men cooked and slept. As for items, he discovered 8 rifle grenades, 40 pounds of salt, and 6,000 pounds of rice, all of which was destroyed. On another mission, the tunnel rats found cameras, films, and printing presses, as well as weapons and ammunition.
For
There was still a
propaganda.
problem, though, and that was the fact that even if the tunnel rats were successful, the Americans still had a problem winning the war. You can take out the tunnel, but there will always be more. This is a
Yeah.
quote from Ho Chi Minh, the president of North Vietnam. You can kill 10 of our men for every 1 we kill of yours, but even at those odds, you will lose and we will win. Take, for instance, the use of booby traps, horrific things that killed around 11% of American soldiers during the war. Sometimes the Viet Cong would put a punji stake trap in a larger part of the tunnel. These were holes filled with sharpened bamboo.
Oh
that
my
would be covered with
gosh.
branches and leaves. When a
Just
soldier
don't
stood on
land on these spikes with your butthole, please.
the trap, the spikes would impale him, and worse, the spikes might have been daubed with poison or feces.
Man, this
The
guy looks
soldiers
happy,
then
like,
screamed out, but he
ah.
wouldn't die. This was the point.
Man, I'm
because
going
the Viet
in.
Cong wanted more men to go down into the tunnel. Not
Fool.
only were there often more traps down there, but even if there weren't, pulling an injured man off sharp sticks and dragging him out through the tunnel was very time-consuming. The Viet Cong would later say that the Americans spent so much time and energy rescuing their injured comrades that they had lots of time to regroup and plan what they were going to do next. The sheer horror of these traps were also very bad for morale. This is what Ho Chi Minh was referring to when he said the Americans would not be victorious. He was right, too. There were other kinds of traps. A tunnel rat might have hit a tripwire while crawling, and then the tunnel would have collapsed on him. There's
Oh,
a story of a
no.
tunnel rat that popped his head out of one entrance, and that triggered a spear that went through his neck. At other
Oh,
times, the Viet
my
Cong made
gosh,
traps like something
man,
you might have seen
oh,
in the
no.
Indiana Jones movie. A man could hit a tripwire in a tunnel, and then a concrete ball studded with spikes would come flying at him. A lieutenant named Jack Flowers said he
Oh my
experienced a
God.
totally different kind of trap. His comrade went into a tunnel, and that man triggered a tripwire. After that, a box full of scorpions rained down on him. Snakes were also
This is
Sometimes
mad.
The Viet Cong would place them in bamboo and tie them to
Sometimes
the roof of the
sometimes Viet Cong would make dig some earth, right, and put a tiger beneath the ground and just cover it with leaves, so people go and they just fall down into the tiger's
tunnel. When a
lair.
soldier hit
But
the
most of the
bamboo,
time, of course, the tigers, like hard to get into the hole. Yeah, it's easier to put some frogs, some scorpions, some I don't know, like snakes. No, I mean like poisonous frogs, of course, not ordinary
snake would
frogs.
pop out and
What
bite
would
the
be
man in
the
his
point of
face.
that?
They scared the hell out of the soldiers, some of whom called them three-step snakes, because after you were bitten, you only had 3 steps before you died. That might be a bit of an exaggeration, but you can imagine being stuck in a dark tunnel with scorpions and snakes.
Man, I cannot
Flowers would
imagine.
dig
I
over
don't want to
100
imagine.
tunnels.
No, thank
He later
you.
said this about the expeditions. In these tunnels, your adrenaline was pumping like a river. I swear I could hear my heart beating. You'd feel your way along for booby traps. It got so you could sense them. Same for the VC. You could smell another human being in the tunnel. You knew he was waiting for you in the dark. All these horrors that the Viet Cong created instilled so much fear in the men that volunteering to be a tunnel rat wasn't exactly on every soldier's mind. But someone had to do it. They had to do it for the team, so to speak. This is what one American said about hiding in tunnels. We often wondered how things happened in the night, and we never saw what was going on. Guys getting their throats cut. Nobody ever knew where these guys were coming from. They had to go down every tunnel they could find, otherwise
Man, this
strange
is
things
hard.
happened during the night.
Hard
It
to watch.
created tremendous psychological stress, not
Mentally.
knowing where the enemy was, so sending down tunnel rats was some peace of mind. There were successful tunnel campaigns, such as Operation Crimp and Operation Cedar Falls, but in the end, the Viet Cong proved to be more resilient. While the American soldiers were literally having nervous breakdowns going into the tunnels, the Vietnamese soldiers were at home in them. If the tunnels were destroyed, they just built more of them. The Americans had the task of Sisyphus, pushing the giant...
I just wonder, how do they manage to build these tunnels? What technology did they use? Like just shovel and that's it? Maybe they had some engineers to do it.
rock up a slope for
Curious,
eternity.
guys, if you know the answer, maybe you can leave it in comment section. Also, please like, subscribe, and press the bell to get notified for the if the new videos come out.
As for the fate of the tunnel rats, there isn't any data on how many of them died, but it's thought that most of them succumbed during those horrific explorations of the Vietnamese subterrane. Out of 100 or so tunnel rats in the American army, only 12 of them lived to tell the tale of those tunnels back on American soil. One of those men was
Man.
Jack Flowers. He later said, "Why did we do it? I wasn't a tough guy. Nobody who knows me would ever suspect I could do what the tunnel rats did. I'd never want a son of mine to have to do it. Thank God," he said, "that these days men don't have to do what he did."